We are going to be unhauling a lot of books today, ruthlessly and without remorse. A couple of months ago, I reorganized my entire bookshelf setup for the year, and as I was going through all of my books, I definitely noticed that there are a lot of books that I currently own and am hanging on to that I don't like. I don't enjoy, I wouldn't recommend them. There's really not a huge reason for me to be keeping them, and I kind of was talking about that in that video, and everybody was just like, unhaul them! I didn't really realize that that was an option, but it is. And so I watched a bunch of people unhauling their books and just being very open and honest about their reasonings for it and kind of why they want to get rid of stuff, and it made me kind of come to the realization that I should do this. I think my motivation for keeping every book that I've ever gotten, whether or not I liked it or even whether or not I had read it at that point, was really because I was so focused on building a library, building a collection and a bookshelf that felt full and felt like something that I had accomplished. And it does feel like that, and I really don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I'm now coming to a point where I actually need a little bit more space and I need more empty shelves to be able to kind of organize in the way that feels better to me. And I can't do that with the amount of books that I currently have, but I have kept many books that I just don't care about, barely remember, have read them, didn't like them, or have them and probably will never read them. So today is just going to be a ramble fest while we're getting rid of books. Just going to talk about them, see where the wind blows us, see how much we give away, and potentially afterwards I might take a little walk to one of the little libraries in my neighborhood and see if I can fit them in any of those. So let's get started. Pretty much these top two shelves are all of my current unread book of the month picks, so books that I've gotten from my book of the month subscription. And I'm not gonna unhaul any of those because even if I'm not very interested in reading it right now or even in the near future or the far future, I know that I chose them at one point for a reason, which makes me think that there will potentially come a time where I will want to read some of these picks because something drew me to them. I didn't just get them for a random reason. I read the synopsis or read reviews and very intentionally chose each of those books, so I'm not going to unhaul any of the book of the month picks. On some of these bottom shelves, which you can't really see, I had a lot of duplicates. For some reason, I don't know why, I've just collected a bunch of duplicates of books, totally by accident, for whatever reason, and so that kind of made a huge dent in the bottom couple of shelves and definitely cleared out some space. I think I have picked all of the books that I want to get rid of. Okay, I've got quite a few books here that we can talk about. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about each one, but I will give a reason for specifically why I am unhauling it. I think there is almost 40 books here, if not exactly 40 books. So that is honestly more than I thought I was going to unhaul. I kind of thought I'd maybe be around 20, but as I was pulling books, I just couldn't stop pulling books. Something came over me and I couldn't stop myself and I took down 40 books. There is a high potential that I might come across a book in this stack that I look at it and reconsider and want to put back on the shelf, but for now I'm feeling pretty good about the picks. Let's go through them. I'm unhauling A Winter in New York, which is a Christmassy, wintry rom-com that I read, I think in 2023 at the end of the year. I didn't read it last year. I think it was sometime in 2023. I really disliked this book for a lot of reasons. A lot of the times when I dislike a romance book, it actually has to do with the writing because you kind of know what to expect with a romance plot. It's gonna be cheesy, it's gonna be simple, hyperbolic, but you're choosing to read that. You're reading a romance book, so you kind of know what to expect. And if the writing is poor, then that is typically what causes me to dislike a romance book. But in this case, I don't remember the writing being super bad. Maybe it was, and that's just not what I'm thinking about. But the thing that I actually disliked about this book was the plot and the characters. There was just nothing enjoyable about it to me. I think this is the one where a woman moves to New York and then she goes to Little Italy one time and walks into a gelato shop that is in danger of closing because they can't find their family recipe for gelato, but then for whatever reason this woman has the secret family recipe for this random shop in Little Italy's gelato, which is not a horrible synopsis, but I just remember the way it being written was so odd, and the choices that these characters made and the way that the author portrayed them, none of them were likable, and the plot was just weird and I didn't like it. That is why I'm unhauling this. I'm also unhauling Ash Princess by Laura Sebastian and The Warrior Heir by Cinda Williams Chima, I think is how you pronounce it. These are two books that I got at a thrift store. I think there's going to be quite a few books in here that I either got for free or from a thrift store that I'm not going to end up reading. These are two of those books where I just kind of randomly chose them and they were like a 50-cent deal. And they've been sitting on my shelf unread for literally years, and I just have zero interest in picking it up. I don't think they're very highly rated, although I haven't done a ton of research into them, but I even reread the synopsises of both of them and nothing really caught my attention very securely, and so I'm being ruthless today. That's what this video is about. If I'm not going to read it in the last like 7 years, then I probably won't end up reading it, so these are going in the unhaul pile. I'm unhauling the book Never Rescue a Rogue. I don't remember where I got this. I think it might have been at Barnes & Noble, but it was one of those buy one get one free deals or buy one get one 50% off deals, and I just kind of randomly chose this one. I think I was very much in a Bridgerton mood. I had just finished one of the seasons of Bridgerton, and I saw this and I was like, that looks very Bridgerton. I tried to read it during a reading slump and I DNF'd it. I don't even think I got 50% of the way through. It just was so uninteresting, very dull in a lot of ways. It wasn't even really scratching the itch of a Bridgerton book. I don't know, there was something about it that felt very surface level and weird, and I wasn't connecting to any of the characters. And I had initially DNF'd it knowing that I was in a reading slump, kind of with the thought of, oh, I'll just pick it up at a later time. And now that I'm thinking about it more, I'm not gonna pick this up. There's just no reason for me to pick this up. I really don't think that I'm gonna have this grand desire to read Never Rescue a Rogue. I don't even remember what this is about. It's definitely an enemies to lovers thing, probably either an arranged marriage or a marriage of convenience thing, kind of set in like Regency England. I don't remember. It's not really worth remembering. I know at one point I've kind of talked about my love for Percy Jackson and also my husband's love for Percy Jackson. When I was reading Percy Jackson and the following series, Heroes of Olympus, I was just the person that didn't treat their books very well, and I would remove all of the dust jackets because I thought it looked better and cleaner, and maybe in some ways it does, but now I have such a great appreciation for a book cover and the design and intentionality that can go into a book cover, even if it's not something that I immediately look at and say, oh, I love the design of that. I still can really appreciate it. So now I have totally flipped, and I see a lot of books on this shelf that I was just a psychopath and removed the dust cover, and I'm so mad at myself for doing that now. When I was reading Heroes of Olympus specifically, I removed all the dust covers, and now they look like this, and coincidentally are very, very dusty and not in the best shape. Not in the worst shape, all things considering, but not in the best shape. So I'm getting rid of these 3 that I have a duplicate for because I thankfully was able to inherit my husband's Heroes of Olympus books, which are in pristine condition with all of their original covers. And now I can display them and they look great, and I'm very proud of it. And I can get rid of these ones, which I'm very much not proud of displaying because I'm crazy. So I'm getting rid of the House of Hades, the Son of Neptune, and the Mark of Athena. However, I am not getting rid of my duplicate of the Lost Hero, which is definitely in the worst shape ever, as you can see. And the reason that I'm not getting rid of it is a sentimental one. My dog, Aspen, who recently we had to say goodbye to, she chewed this up the day that I got this book. I was so excited about this series. I was at the bookstore when it opened on release day. I could not contain myself about this book series that was coming out because I was so obsessed with Percy Jackson. And I came home and I read The Lost Hero and I started it that night. And then I left it, I think maybe in my room or some room somewhere. And then I was walking in and just saw this trail of pages and the literal cover of the book just like around a pile of chaos. And my dog had just fully chewed this book up. So I taped the whole side of it and I wrote the Lost Hero in Sharpie. You can see all of the puppy marks and the claw marks on it and stuff. And as much as I was upset by that and as much as I hated that, now I can't part with it. So this is a duplicate that is staying, but the other duplicates are being unhauled, and these will remain the ones that are displayed. Weirdly enough, I also have one duplicate of The Order of the Phoenix. It's the only Harry Potter book that I have a duplicate of. I have no idea why, but I'm getting rid of this one because this is almost 900 pages. So this takes up a lot of of space on the shelf. It is being unhauled. And I also have a duplicate of Divine Rivals. Why? I thought I lost my original copy. I actually finished it and then put it down somewhere, and I think either my friend or my husband was cleaning the house and just put it in the most obscure spot possible, and I thought that I lost the book, and so I bought a duplicate of it so that I could display the two together because I really liked this first book and I wanted to make sure I had a copy. Months and months later, it was on the like very top shelf of the cabinet that we never open and we never go into. I found my duplicate, and now I'm getting rid of my duplicate. These next three are a couple books that I just kind of got for free for some reason or another. They were kind of at like an independent bookstore, and they were doing a special where if you buy a book, you get to take a free one. Or I think that this was a blind book date that I got for free, and I just know that I will never read these books personally, and so I kind of want them just off the shelf so it's a little bit cleaner and a little bit more minimal. I am getting rid of these two books in the From Blood and Ash series, A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire and The Crown of Gilded Bones. I think A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire is the second book, and I think The Crown of Gilded Bones is the third book. I actually don't know. Haven't read either of these. Well, I read about halfway through the second book and then DNF'd it and decided that there was just no way for me to continue through the series. I was disliking it so much. But I'm not going to get rid of the first book because honestly, I didn't mind that one. It was okay. I semi-enjoyed it. I think I even kind of liked it in the middle of reading it, and then after I finished it, I was like, actually, that wasn't that good, but it was okay. And so I'm keeping that also just kind of as like a badge of honor. Like I got through the first book, and then the second two books are just so awful, and I think the rest of the series gets awful as well. I have no interest in completing it, so these books are getting unhauled. That is why there is some merit in buying a book in a series one at a time and not buying like three at a time like I did because I expected to love the series. I didn't. This isn't even the complete series, I think. I think there's a fourth one. I don't know. Goodbye. This next one was one that was gifted to me by somebody that said I would love this book. I never read it, and honestly, with all of the discourse that is happening about it online, I really have no interest in reading it. It's been sitting on my shelf for a couple years, and I just know that I will not have the interest, and it's such a long series, something that I will never want to commit to. That is the Zodiac Academy. Never read it, probably never gonna plan on reading it. I don't even fully know totally what it's about, but I do remember when my friend gave me this book, I saw the cover and I was like, ooh, that looks really bad. It's probably not really bad. I'm sure there's a lot of things about it to be enjoyed. I'm not giving an opinion on whether or not it's a good book or a bad book because I can't because I haven't read it. Based on the cover, it kind of looks like a bad book. Although I have read books that I love that have horrible covers. That really doesn't mean anything. I am guilty of judging a book by its cover many times. I just know that this is not a series that I'm gonna want to get into anytime soon, maybe ever. And so I kind of just want it off of my shelf just for, again, it to be kind of clean and clear. I'm getting rid of The Eye of the World, which is the first book in Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. I can't. I tried to read this. I got 100 or 200 pages into it and wasn't enjoying it at all. I know what happens in the story. I know what happens with the characters. I've had many friends that have read it. Friends that have read it and loved it. Friends that have read it and disliked it. And I just will not be able to commit to a series that long. Knowing what happens to the characters in the end, I personally think it would be a waste of my time, and I'd rather spend that time reading books that there's a much higher chance of me enjoying. And the size of this book, for being the first book in a series, is crazy. It's so wild to me. Somebody gave this to me, and I feel like I should probably give it back to them rather than unhauling it, but the point is, it will be off of my shelf one way or another. Two more books here that I got at a thrift store, again, probably for like 50 cents. I was in this phase for a couple of months one time where I would just go to a thrift store and get a bunch of books, and I read a few of them, but I was never able to really catch up with myself and read them all. And now that I've kind of gotten past that phase, there's just not really any part of me that wants to go back and read those books that I picked up. I got this book called The Mists of Avalon one time, and I think it is about specifically the women in and around King Arthur's court and the stories during Merlin and the Lady of the Lake from like the perspective of women. It sounds really, really cool, and if there was any book that I was gonna keep and read from that kind of time period of my life, it might be this, but I have tried to read it a couple times and the writing style is just so difficult for me to get into, and it just hasn't done a good job of catching my attention and keeping my attention. As much as I have tried to read this book, I'm just not having success with it. And I've had it for a couple years and still haven't been able to read it or finish it, so I think it's just time to get rid of this one. And maybe one day I'll cross paths with it again. I'll find it at another thrift store and then decide to finally read it. But for now, it's got to be unhauled. And then another thrift store book that I got, Finnegan of the Rock. This cover is crazy. This man is staring straight into your soul. Oh, look, the other books in the series have people staring into your soul as well. I don't know anything about this book. I don't know anything about this series. I don't know why I got it from a thrift store, but I did, and I never read it once again. There is part of me that doesn't feel super bad about getting rid of a lot of these books because a lot of them I got for free, or they're duplicates, or again, I got them at a thrift store for like $1 or 50 cents. So it doesn't feel like I'm just throwing away a lot of money here. I'm just making room. I'm starting fresh. This one's gotta go because I know I'm not gonna read it. Okay, this is interesting. So I'm going to get rid of the first two books in the An Ember in the Ashes series. That is not an easy thing to say quickly. In the An Ember in the Ashes series, because I want to get the new covers. I read book one. I've only read book one in this series and I loved it. I loved it so much. This was such a great book for me. And then I bought book two and never ended up reading it because I think there was a pretty long gap between book one and book two for me. I think I read this when it came out and then I had to wait for book two and I just kind of lost steam, which is something that definitely happens to me. I'm much more likely to blaze through a series if all of the books are completed. And so I still haven't read past book one, even though I loved book one. But book two has been on my shelf for a while. But recently, the new covers came out and I think they are so freaking cool and I want them very badly and I want all of them displayed on here. And so I've decided to get rid of these two, unhaul them, because I want to buy the complete series of the new covers. And I am very excited to finish this series, and I think getting the series with the new covers is going to motivate me to finish it as well. I'll probably reread book one because I think I read book one back in 2018 or 2019, so it's been a while. I do remember quite a bit about it, but I think I need the world building again and I need some of the backstories again. So I am excited to read this series, but these two books are being unhauled to make room for the new ones. After I finished The Hunger Games for the first time, I went and read Divergent, and I loved that sort of until the end. I didn't love the end, but I loved reading that series again. And after I finished Divergent, I was really looking for a series to read that kind of felt like that. And after doing some research, everything was pointing to The Fifth Wave. Look at me not having dust covers again. Everybody said that you should read The Fifth Wave. This is, I think, kind of a post-apocalyptic dystopian book about aliens coming. And I read the first book. I think I read the second book, The Infinite Sea, as well. I'm almost positive that I read the second book as well. I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. And not to make snap judgments or anything, but I think one of the reasons I didn't like it is because it was a man that was writing it. And a lot of the time I struggle with men that are writing female main characters, especially younger female main characters in first person perspective, because I just don't really think that there's a way that they will be able to understand the mind of like a 14, 15-year-old, 16-year-old girl. And so it feels very unrealistic, even though the whole book is unrealistic, the world is ending and aliens are coming, but I still need to be able to believe my character and connect with my character, and I wasn't able to do that with this. I think there's a love triangle in it too, and I didn't like that. And I also just don't like world-ending books. It's not my favorite type of genre. So this one really didn't grip me at all, and I have no desire to finish the series, and I kind of just want it off my shelf. So I'm getting rid of The Fifth Wave and The Infinite Sea, which I think is book one and book two. This is another series I'm getting rid of that was gifted to me, and I just am not gonna read it. And that is The Uglies, Pretties, and Specials. And I'm just not interested in reading it. I've almost picked it up a couple of times, but I think it's kind of in a genre that I probably will rarely visit again. I've almost picked it up a couple of times, really just based off of the recommendation of a couple people, but there's nothing about it that is interesting to me right now. There's nothing about it that is gripping my attention, and so I'm not interested, and I know myself, and I know I'm not gonna read it, and I really don't like the covers, and I don't really want them on my shelf. So this is a very superficial reason that I'm getting rid of this one. I just don't want to display them right now. This is a duplicate. One of these books was a gift. I have a different copy of Fae Bound, so I'm gonna get rid of this one to make room. Way back when, I think in like 2016, maybe 2017, I was gifted a book of the month box that had every book in it from that month. And I read every single book from that month. And I know that it was really early on because the books are a different size than the book of the month ones now. They're much bigger. These ones are short and tiny. I need a comparison. This is the size of them now. Oh, this is impossible. You can see they're shorter. And I was gifted this entire box and I read all of them and I didn't like any of them. Maybe I kind of liked some of them. I mostly didn't like any of them. And I also mostly removed the dust covers of a lot of them. I just don't really remember it. There's nothing about it that has stuck with me. There's nothing about it that marked me as a specific book. And now they're just kind of on my book of the month shelf, but they're a different size than everything else. And I don't have the dust covers to a lot of them. And it's just kind of annoying me. So it's time to get rid of them. Enchanted Islands is one of them. I actually do love this cover, but I remember not liking this one. Is this the one about the plane? I don't know what this one's about. I think it's about two women friends that kind of grow apart, and it takes place sort of around World War II. It's more about like this female friendship that spans a lot of time and a lot of places, and they're originally from the Galapagos Islands, which is probably why it's called Enchanted Islands. I just remember not really liking this one, and maybe I read it at the wrong time and I should have read it when I was more interested in the subject matter, but that just didn't happen, and so now I'm kind of done with it. I have no emotional attachment to this at all, and again, it's just not the right size. So it's gotta go. This one is The Veins of the Ocean. I think this is the one about the plane crash, but who's to say, because we're missing the synopsis and the dust cover. I have no idea. I have no idea what this is about. It's gotta go. Modern Lovers. This is, I think, kind of like a romance book between these two high schoolers. And one of the reasons that I really didn't like this book is because it is about high schoolers, maybe to start. I don't know if they get older, but I remember them being really young, but I remember a lot of the subject matter being very adult, and there was just something about it that felt kind of off to me. And so I didn't really like Modern Lovers by Emma Straub either. Before the Fall. I don't remember this one. That was probably a really boring section because I can't talk about any of the books, but I just know they all came in a box together. I blazed through them all because I just wanted to read them because I was curious, and I didn't like any of them. I also got Shrill in this, which is a non-fiction book, and I'm pretty sure that book of the month pretty much exclusively does fiction now. And so it's funny that there was a non-fiction book in my initial box, and I wonder if that's something that's changed about them now, or if maybe they do biographies. This is technically a biography from a female comedian named Lindy West. I didn't know who she was. I hadn't heard any of her stand-up or any of her comedy specials. And so I really, once again, had no emotional attachment to it at all. And I thought maybe it'd be interesting hearing kind of the perspective of a female comedian, but I kind of just remember it being really crude and not funny. I don't know if it's supposed to be funny, but it wasn't funny, and I just didn't have a good time with it. I think I was in a bad mood when I read all of those books because I didn't like them. But look at Book of the Month now. They've really stepped up their game. They have chosen some books that have been some of my favorite of all time. They just had to get their feet under them for a little bit, and that box was not a good box. I'm getting rid of this book called No Summit Out of Sight. This is a nonfiction book that I read a little bit ago. It's actually a super cool story. It's about this young boy named Jordan Romero. He is the youngest person ever to climb all 7 summits. And the 7 summits are Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Kosciuszko, don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think it's Kosciuszko, Mount Elbrus, Mount, oh gosh, Aconcagua, Mount Denali, Everest, and Vinson. I don't know, man, but they're really, really tall mountains, and he was the youngest person ever to climb them. And the whole book is an autobiography written by him about his training sessions and what he did in order to prepare his body to climb these summits, because it's a really intense process. And that was a very fun thing to read about. It was really interesting. He was very, very young when he wrote this book. It sounds kind of like a kid is writing it. It's very simple writing. It's very easy writing to understand, but it was very well done, I think. And I liked it a lot. I just have really no reason to keep it. I'm not going to reread it. It didn't really mark me, like I said, about maybe some of the other nonfiction books that I have. It's not necessarily something that I recommend to people. So I think it's just kind of time to make room. But I did like this book. I'm just sort of done with it. The next book that I'm getting rid of is called The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. I remember exactly where I was when I was reading this book. I was in Nice, France, in a beautiful Airbnb. I brought it specifically on that trip because it was short and tiny and light, and I didn't have a Kindle at that time or any sort of e-reader, and so I would read physical books while I was traveling, and so a lot of my suitcase was just physical books. This is one that I read on that trip, and I remember actually buying it because of the cover. I loved the cover. It sounded like an interesting synopsis and subject matter, and I loved a lot of it, and I hated the ending. It made me so upset, so angry. This book still to this day is one of the most infuriating books ever to me. It takes place very far in the future, and it's about this young girl who is the only one alive on this spaceship that is leaving Earth. And then suddenly one day she kind of comes across another spaceship in space and starts communicating with the captain of that ship, and it sort of is a little bit of a romance, and then just some stuff goes down and things happen, and I really disliked it. So that is getting off of my shelf because still every time I look at it, it kind of makes me angry. Although I do really love the cover of this book still to this day. Unfortunate. I'm getting rid of The Last Song by Nicholas Sparks. This was the first romance book I think I ever read, and I remember reading it pretty young and feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm reading a romance book. That's crazy. And it was fine. I think I enjoyed it at the time. Maybe I was like 15 when I read it, and now I'm like, I don't need to keep this. There's no reason for me to keep this, so getting rid of that. Oh, look, another one without a cover. This one is The Darkest Star. Oh my gosh. This is by the same girl that wrote From Blood and Ash. That's crazy. I never knew that. This is The Darkest Star. It is the beginning of a series that I don't even know what the series is. And I don't know why I picked up this book, but I did get this book and I hated this book. I thought it was so badly written. I thought the characters were so bad. There were so many cliched tropes in it that just were not enjoyable in any way. I did not realize that this was the same author of From Blood and Ash, and now a lot of things make sense. So I'm getting rid of The Darkest Star for sure. I think From Blood and Ash is actually better than that book, even though I still don't really like it. This book's called The Hummingbird Dagger. I got this at a random independent bookstore while I was traveling one time. It's kind of like a mystery book that takes place in Victorian England, and it was not a good mystery. It was a bad mystery. And they also kind of tried to force a romance on us as well that was just very unbelievable and uninteresting. And I remember getting to the end of this book and being like, I wish that I didn't read that. I wasted my time reading that. But here's the thing. I would love to know if other people feel this way. I think that it may be physically impossible to DNF a mystery book. I just can't do it. Literally, if there is any sort of unanswered question, or there's a mystery or a problem that is presented in the beginning of the book could be absolute garbage, and I will have to finish it because I have to know what happens, and I can't just Google it. I've never gotten to a point where a book was so bad that I finished it, didn't get the answers of the mystery, and Googled it, to be fair. But there have been plenty of mystery books that I've just straight up disliked, but I finished it because I needed to know what happens at the end. Still probably a personal preference, but I'm curious to know if anybody else has a similar experience with mystery books. I'm getting rid of What You Gonna Do. It was not good. And I know I'm never gonna recommend it. I know I'm never gonna read it again. It kind of scratched the itch for me at the time when I read it, but I just don't think it's a very good book. It's gotta go. I'm getting rid of this book called The Nautical Chart. I don't remember a ton about this book either. This is another thrift store book. I actually think that I got it. Oh no, I think this is an airport book. I think one time I was traveling and I didn't have any books and I wanted to read something, and so I went into the airport bookstore and I picked this one up for some odd reason, and I disliked the main character of this book so much. He was so infuriating and annoying, pretentious, irresponsible, arrogant, but kind of all in a grimy way, not in like a confident way, more in just like a very slimy, grimy way. But he's also supposed to be like the hero of the story, and I just hated reading about him. I think when I read this book, I didn't really subscribe to the idea that you could just DNF something anytime you weren't enjoying it. I still sometimes have a little bit of trouble with that. I feel like I have to finish a book even if I don't like it. I'm getting better at it. I definitely didn't believe that it was possible when I was reading this book, and so I did finish it. This is one that I wished I didn't finish. I think it was really dumb. I have this random book on poetry that I think I got for free at Barnes & Noble. I don't need it, but it's cute. but I don't need it. I'm getting rid of this copy of The Outsiders because it is a duplicate. I have The Outsiders, and then one time my husband really wanted to read it, didn't go looking for it, and then just bought himself a copy, the exact same copy. This is the same edition that I have as well. And then he was reading it one day. I was like, oh, you're reading The Outsiders? He was like, yeah, I just recently bought it. I was like, oh, we have that book. So this is going to be unhauled. I'm gonna get rid of We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This was a blind book date that I read, and it was very fun. It was a fun experience to read a blind book date. I never would have picked this book up or chosen to read it if it hadn't been a blind book date. So for that reason, I kind of enjoyed just the reading experience, but overall, I didn't love the story. I didn't love the writing. And once again, I just know that I'll never recommend this book necessarily. I'm not gonna read it again. So it's gotta go. It's being unhauled. And then lastly, I'm unhauling this book. 42 books. I'm getting rid of 42 books. There's literally no shot that the little libraries around my neighborhood will have space for 42 books. So I think I'm gonna have to slowly chip away at it. I think I'm gonna put these all in a big box and then put it in my basement. And then every time I go on a walk, or if it looks like one of the little libraries is a little bit more free and open, I will just kind of take a stack and go put it in the library. You know what? Let's do it now. Let's take a stack to the little library. Okay, here's my stack that I'm gonna be taking to the little library right now. So let's go on a walk. Thank you to everybody that encouraged me to start unhauling books, because I think it kind of just changed my life in a little way. But as always, thank you so much for joining and watching and hanging out with me on this corner of the internet, and we will see you next time.